We are live and recording. Yay! Hello, everybody. So, one happy Monday. I was like, wait, is it really Monday? Yes, it is a Monday. So, happy Monday. I am super excited because joining us this evening is Becky Chambers. So, a very large round of applause because we are celebrating book 4 in a very popular, amazingly awesome sci-fi series, and the book in question is The Galaxy and the Ground Within. You always have the best titles for your book, so just hats off. And Becky is going to be in conversation with Andrew. I'm so sorry, I should have double checked with you. Your last name is it Liptak?
Liptak.
Liptak. Okay, I was like, I'm going to be fancy and not say it phonetically. And of course, I always make the wrong choice in the pronunciation department. But
it's okay, you should see my junk mail.
But Becky will be in conversation with Andrew Liptak. And just to give you a little intro into our authors, Becky is a science fiction author based in Northern California. She is best known for her Hugo Award-winning Wayfarers series. Becky has a background in performing arts and grew up in a family heavily involved in space science. Hats off to the families of science. She spends her free time playing video and tabletop games, keeping bees, which is amazingly awesome, and looking through her telescope. Having hopped around the world a bit, she is now back in her home state where she lives with her wife. She hopes to see Earth from orbit one day. I hope we get to see that too. Not me, because I'm a wuss and get motion sick, but I hope for people like you who can brave the air shuttles and whatnot, that dream does come true soon.
I also get motion sick, so it might be a terrible idea, but I think it's worth it.
Once you're floating and there's no gravity, and it'll work itself out. And Andrew is a writer and historian from Vermont. He is the author of the forthcoming book, Cosplay: A History, which I think will speak to many of our readers out there because we have Comic-Con, and I know a lot of people who love cosplay in our community. And his work has appeared in Gizmodo, IO9, Kirkus Reviews, Tor.com, and a bunch of other publications. So now that we have the formalities out of the way, just a couple house rules for everyone. We have, as everyone can see, hello everyone who is in the chat section. Thank you for the love. Keep it coming. But that is our general chat section for those who are new to the right-hand side. And then if you look down below, there is a button that says Ask a Question. I would make sure you take advantage of that amazing button because events are fun. You get to actually interact with the author. So poke Becky's brain, ask her whatever questions you have. And then most importantly, to support these authors as well as your independent bookstore, if you would like to purchase The Galaxy and the Ground Within or any of either one of their other books, if you look down below, that purchase book button will take you to a page that has all of their books available. And on that note, thank you all so much for joining us, and I will see you at the end of the event. Bye!
All right. Well, thanks for everybody for coming out. It's a real pleasure to chat with Becky. I've been a fan of her books for a number of years, and I'm very excited to chat with you about them. One of the things that caught my interest we had a chat a couple of days ago, and one of the things that I learned is that you have some interesting connections to the space industry. And I'm curious if you just, before we talk about the books, is just how did that closeness to the space industry help inspire you or help push you into science fiction as a fan and as eventually a writer?
Yeah, so to give the full context here for other folks, my mom is an astrobiology educator. My dad is retired now, but he worked he worked in aerospace. He was a mechanical engineer, and my grandfather was a mathematician. He was contracted during the Apollo program and also on the shuttle, both through NASA. So for me, it was just this extremely normal thing that my family did. I really took it for granted. I was just like, oh yeah, everybody's interested in space. This is just what people do. But my parents, to their credit, really gave me, a ton of room to just explore my own interests. So even though space science was obviously part of, the background radiation of my childhood, no pun intended, but we'll stick with it. I was very much encouraged to come to space on my own and to, you know, to figure out what it was I wanted to do. So I am definitely the weird artsy one in the family. Everyone else works in STEM, but it just it was always there, and it was always just such a beautiful thing that was, you know, part of our family conversations, and you know, I really value that I was taught, even if it wasn't, you know, if I wasn't going into that field, that I was always taught to, you know, to think scientifically and to be scientifically literate, and to really see the wonder in the universe. So even though in some ways, like, I feel like I came to space on my own, which is of course not true. It's definitely something I absorbed through osmosis, and it's just a part of myself I can't separate from the rest.
So what about it? What about space and space exploration really? I mean, growing up in it, obviously you're surrounded by it, and there's sort of the family connection. But what about space really was the thing that grabbed you, and what was it that sort of kept you going back? Is it the pictures that like the Hubble sends back? Is it seeing the astronauts suited up and flying around in orbit or jumping around on the moon, or something else?
So for me, it's all about, I mean, there's a lot about space I love, but if we're going to boil it down to one thing, for me, it's all about the overview effect. The shift in perspective that happens when you see Earth from above. And I think space was always something I thought was really cool and really beautiful, but it wasn't until I was in middle school and started reading Carl Sagan. Contact came out in theaters when I was 12. And, you know, so then I read the book, and then I read all of his other stuff. And it just gave me a perspective on human existence and on our place in the universe that is still to this day just the most valuable thing for me. You know, independently of my own work, the way that understanding how tiny and insignificant we are is actually, to me, an enormous source of comfort and beauty. And so that's just that has been blowing my mind for, you know, 25 plus years now. And it's something I definitely draw from in all of my work, trying to summon that feeling of the universe is so much bigger than you will ever be able to fathom, and yet you belong to it. It's yours, just as much as it is anybody else's.
I was just writing recently about the, I want to say it was the Apollo 8 mission that went around the moon for the first time, and that's where the famous Earthrise photo was taken. Mm-hmm. And the astronauts were speaking about how it was an accident that they took that shot. They didn't actually have it planned. They just looked out the window and took it, and it's such a profound image, and it's definitely one that I suspect has inspired a lot of science fiction writers over the years.
Absolutely.
And scientists and other folks as well. Did you break up?
No, I think there was a little bit of a hiccup there, but now we're good.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So, so how do you go from, you mentioned that you were sort of the artsy person in your family. How did you start to go from reading science fiction to creating it?
So, I mean, I've been writing ever since I can remember. Even when I was, you know, little, I was always scribbling something. It's just, I don't know how I've always liked to communicate best. You know, when I was little, I would always write nonsense stories about all kinds of stuff. When I was in high school, I wrote a ton of fan fiction. But what I studied theater, and I worked in theater for a bit, for a few years after college. And it's still something I love very much, and it's an education I draw from a lot in my work. But I realized very quickly, once I started working in it professionally, that the stories I was interested in weren't happening on stage. You know, I looked at the fact that, like, my coworkers and friends, you know, once we were done with a full day of work, or with, you know, rehearsal or opening night or what have you, when we were done working, they would all go to one-act festivals or go to other rehearsals for little fringe things. They'd go see other plays. I would go home and play video games and watch Star Trek. And so at some point, I just kind of stopped and looked at that because I wasn't really feeling satisfied in my work. And I was like, I think I need to really listen to that, really look at what it is that I'm gravitating toward in my own time, and embrace that instead. So, to me, it was a very natural sort of shift, that storytelling and collaborative storytelling is something I'm still extremely interested in and love very much. But I just, I had to go find the stories that were working for me.
And so you started writing. Your first book was the Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Where did that story come from, and how did you begin to assemble it?
So The Long Way was such a hodgepodge of all the sci-fi and space opera that I grew up with and loved. I mentioned Star Trek, Star Wars as well. Farscape was another big one. It very much was born out of this deep love that I've always had for, your big intergalactic communities and your multi-species spaceports and all of that good stuff. I started tinkering with it when I was in college. I had a really boring desk job on campus. I worked at the campus gym, and I'm very much not a gym person, nor am I a 6 a.m. person, but that's the shift I had anyway. And my job was to swipe people in at the front desk. And I got in trouble because I was always reading on the job, and so I always had my nose in a book, and I wasn't being attentive enough. So people would come up to the desk, and I wouldn't see them because I was reading. So I wasn't allowed to read anymore. And so I figured out that I could write at the desk because it looked like I was working. I was not, but I could write. And this one day I was just bored and making up aliens, and I made up this reptilian sort of species, and I wrote this character sketch of a woman who I thought of as the poster child for that, and she was Sissix, who is one of the main characters in The Long Way. And I decided she needed some friends, and they needed a job, and I needed to figure out how that job worked. And so that meant I had to invent the whole universe around it, and it just all snowballed from there. And I spent a good 7 years before I actually sat down and wrote the thing, just assembling bits and pieces. I would overhear a conversation on the bus, or I worked as a bartender for a bit, so I was always hearing like little interesting snippets. I would write something down that I thought was interesting and, reskin it so that it was, my space dudes talking about it instead, or I'd read something cool about space or biology or whatnot, and I'd be like, oh, I could use that. And so I ended up with this huge box full of just notes and notebooks and Post-its and things, and eventually just let it all simmer down into what became The Long Way.
And then that you basically the book. I think I first became aware of it when it was a Kickstarter campaign, and so that was sort of you got a lot of support from folks to finish the book. So tell me a little bit about how that worked and how it went from finishing a book and presumably self-publishing it for those backers to where it actually became a I don't want to say a proper published book, but a
traditionally published
book.
Yeah. So this was in 2012. I was working as a freelance writer. I knew I wanted to be writing fiction. I was hoping to be writing fiction professionally, but like so many of us, I started out in the content mines of the internet, and and yep. I ran into this couple months stretch where I didn't have any gigs lined up. Like I'd been pitching and pitching and pitching and pitching, and nothing was happening. And I was very much living paycheck to paycheck, and living off of toast and beans at that point. So it was a little bit dire. But I was working on The Long Way at the time, and I was about 2/3 of the way done with the manuscript when I hit that point. And I didn't want to lose that momentum because I've never written a book before, and I didn't want to stop, and so I thought, okay, I can either scramble and get into like serious job seeking mode, which, you know, probably would have been the sensible thing. Or I can have this one last Hail Mary and see if I can buy myself this extra time I need to finish this. So I went to Kickstarter, and I really I made this deal with myself that if it wasn't successful, that was you know, I don't believe in signs, but like, I was like, I'll take that as a sign from the universe that I need to, you know, start being serious and get a real job, or, you know, be a respectable adult, or whatever that means. But to my eternal surprise, the Kickstarter campaign was successful. And so, due to mostly strangers, I was able to finish the book. I initially was intending to pursue traditional publishing because I thought it would be a better fit for me. I'm not good at self-promotion or at marketing, and those are strengths you really need to have if you're going to be self-published. But I wasn't successful with getting picked up right off the bat. I was on submission for about a year, and at that point I was like, I have all these backers who, you know, I promised this thing to, and I want to get it into their hands. And, you know, so I decided at that point to self-publish. And I figured that was it. Honestly, I got the book to the backers. I sold a few copies, but not a lot. I thought that was it. And what happened from there was just dumb luck. I went to a party at Worldcon, my very first Worldcon, and met a woman who I had no idea she was an editor, and I did not talk to her about my book at all. We just hung out and had beers at this party, and a few months later, she got in touch and told me who she was and where she worked, and said she'd read my book and would I like a book deal. So that was my my very unpredictable path from there to here.
It's not a typical origin story for most authors, that's for sure.
No, and it's difficult to give advice on that front when people say, how do you break into traditional publishing? I just have to say, I don't know, have a beer with a stranger at a convention and see what happens.
One of the things that I've always been really impressed with ever since I started the series, and it seems like this is a sort of a running theme throughout all the books, is that they're very focused on community. In the first book, you have this, you know, community aboard a spaceship, you know, all these different people coming together. And in your latest one, you have these 4 strangers coming together in basically a spaceport, and they're coming together under very dire circumstances, which is not unlike what we've endured for the last year. But I'm curious as to what sort of drives you to tell these types of stories, these, you know, where they're very focused on community, they're very focused on friendship, and just the very quiet parts of life. Because it's so different from what, you know, if you look at any a big blockbuster movie or some of the bigger blockbuster books where you've got somebody saving the world, or, you know, having to solve this intractable problem in order to keep everybody safe. These, and I don't mean this in a bad way, these are not that, and I think that's something that is a lot of people appreciate.
Yeah, I will be the first person to tell you that if you're looking for a book with a big crunchy plot, don't read my stuff. That's not what you'll find here. For me, it ties back to the thing I touched on earlier about that very Carl Sagan-y view of the universe, about the simultaneous qualities we have of being insignificant and wonderful. If you look at both how human spaceflight has, the trajectory of human spaceflight in the real world, and the sorts of stories we tell within science fiction, typically, they both have this quality of being about very exceptional people, right? In the real world, you start out with, the military elite, people with the right stuff back in the space age. That's what they were looking for, was this very, very select bunch. Nowadays, you've got, we're looking for very different things in the astronaut corps, but it's still enormously competitive. And if you look at the resumes of people who do become astronauts, they're wildly impressive. They are better people than the rest of us. They have a lot more energy than I do. And now we're starting to move into this era of private space flight, in which space is accessible to people who have the money, the economic elite, right? Like if you're, you know, of that upper crust, you get to go. And so there is this sense that it only is the exceptional that gets to go out there. And if you look at genre fiction or speculative fiction, it's very much the same. We have stories about chosen ones and princesses and heroes, and even if it's like the scrappy underdog, it's the scrappy underdog who saves the galaxy, you know. And don't get me wrong, those stories are what I grew up on and still love. You know, like, we tell those stories for a reason, because they're great. But I think it reinforces this idea that space only belongs to the very special few, when in reality, you know, we're all stardust, we're all here, this is for all of us. And so to that end, what I try to do with Wayfarers in particular is to really drive home this idea that the ordinary people among us, the rest of us, also belong here. And so in that, I am telling stories about people who are working or middle class, people who are not the movers and shakers of the galaxy, people who will never be in a history book anywhere, you know, people who are just worried about their families and what they're going to have for dinner and whether or not they should take this job. These extremely normal, everyday, low stakes in a galactic sense, but to that person, extremely high stakes, right? So that's where the simplicity of it comes in. As far as community is concerned, that also plays in, right? Because the space doesn't belong to just one of us. We have to embrace it as a place that belongs to everybody here, and we have to figure out how to navigate that, which can often be difficult. But if we are going to have a future in space, a human future in space, it's going to depend on cooperation and collaboration, and it can't be seen as something individual and exceptional. So that's why I focus on those kinds of stories.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit. There was a Mary Robinette Kowal, who wrote The Calculating Stars, recently wrote a really great New York Times piece about accessibility in space, and basically how you know, space flight has been designed for you know, white men, and that goes to everything from the size of spacesuits to the way equipment is configured, like a seat or something. And it was really eye-opening for me, just because it was it's all the background elements, right? They're all sitting. You know, they're things that you don't necessarily think about, but then once you sort of pay attention to it and have that light shown on it, it really stands out quite a bit. And I think that's you know, I think that's one reason why your books have had some you know, considerable appeal, because they're highlighting, you know, these small moments do exist in between the big action scenes or the big set pieces.
I'm glad you brought up, actually, if I may add, I'm glad you brought up like seats on you know, spacecraft is one of those. These are those sorts of things are things I really like to play with in Wayfarers a lot, because you know, it's not a galaxy that just belongs to humans. It's you know, we are very much the underdogs there. You know, it's all these other species as well. So I like to bring things in like, you know, this chair doesn't quite work for you because it's built for someone with a tail, or, you know, having these really complicated signs in lots of different languages and colors and lights and all sorts of stuff so that everybody can read it. You know, accessibility is something I think about a lot, not just human accessibility, but alien accessibility. And that too is because I want to make it clear that it takes work, and you have to make sure that this is a comfortable space for everyone, but that work is worth it in the end.
Yeah, and another thing I really loved about Galaxy, the latest one, is there was a scene that had me in stitches, where the various aliens were talking about cheese. And for anybody who hasn't read the book, this isn't really a spoiler, but there's basically one of the characters is like, "What the hell is cheese?" And everyone's like, "Oh no, don't ask that question." And they basically explain that it's you know, food made from mammals' milk, and they're all like, "What? That is the worst." You know, the reaction is very funny, and I don't want to paraphrase it, but this is actually a good point. Go buy the book and you can read it for yourself. It's a really funny scene, but it's also one of those things where you're sort of thinking like, well, yeah, like there's a lot of stuff we do that will be really, out there for any alien that comes that we encounter. We have a lot of strange things that we take as perfectly normal, but they don't. So
yeah, those little cultural mishaps are something I really enjoy.
Yeah, and I was listening to the audiobook and I was in stitches. I had just arrived at my destination and ended up like laughing in my car for 5 minutes. I'm glad nobody walked by because that would have been interesting to explain. I was listening to this talking about aliens, talking about cheese. For those of you who haven't read it, the latest book is it's basically about 4 aliens, as I said a minute ago, that 4 aliens who are on this inhabitable planet. It's basically used as an intergalactic way station. And while they're on there, they all have places that they're planning on going. They have destinations, and they're all basically just stopping over to refuel or to restock or whatever. And while they're there, there's like a Kessler syndrome effect where all the satellites crash and everyone's stuck on the ground because it's too dangerous to go out into orbit. And it strikes me that I know books take a long time to write, but it strikes me that we have endured this same sort of thing where there's this slow moving disaster going around outside in the form of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're all sort of forced inside and stuck in order to stay safe. There are some parallels here, and I'm curious as to what was the timeline like as you were writing this book, and if COVID-19 really played a role here, like how did it impact the writing of this story?
So Galaxy is a book that I knew as I was finishing it was going to hit different than I intended when I started it. So I finished writing Galaxy like in June of last year. So the pandemic started, or lockdown started while I was in the home stretch of it. So I was in like my last 3 months of writing it once that all happened. So that was not on my mind at all, obviously, once I started the book. The thing that was actually on my mind at the beginning of the book was the California wildfires in 2019. We had these, for those who are not, well, I guess maybe a lot of you are in California, we'll see, maybe. For those who are not, we had these power shutoffs that were intended to mitigate wildfire risk. And ours, where I live, the first one we had, there was like 6 hours warning, and it was out for 5 days, and there was nothing to do except just sit there and navel gaze. And this is an experience that is not that novel now because we were all very accustomed to just being at home. But it was something that really stuck with me, and that was consciously what I was drawing from while I was writing the book, was that feeling of this sort of technological disaster and feeling really stuck in the middle of that. I am sure that this book was influenced by the pandemic. I'm sure it wouldn't have been the same book otherwise. But like my conscious thought during it was just hit your deadline. Like once things kicked off and once things got bad, I was really just trying to like laser focus on the book and be like, don't think about what's going on outside. I failed miserably at that, but just focus on what's happening here. So I am sure that all of everything I was thinking about, everything I was scared about during that time bled in there as well. But it was not done with conscious intent.
Do you think that there's some lessons that or are there lessons that you hope readers would derive from the book, given that we sort of have the light at the end of the tunnel now?
That's a good question. I mean, I think regardless of the situation, the message of be kind to strangers, right? I think that that's really what it comes down to, is that you can have a profound impact on the people around you, even if they're only part of your life for a few days, and that's not a spoiler to say, like, these people are, they're all travelers headed elsewhere. This is a very short period in their lives that we encounter, and yet they do have a huge effect on each other. And so I think that's, I mean, you can apply that anywhere, but especially in something like what we're all going through now, is just to listen to other people's experiences and to approach other people with compassion, and to realize that, you know, even somebody who you just kind of brush, you know, like cross paths with at a truck stop or what have you, you might change their life a little bit, you know. So just be careful of how you step, I think.
Mm. And last question, we'll go over to audience questions in a second. We've got a couple in already, but looking back, Wayfarers is the fourth book in the series. You've been writing this world for quite a long time. I guess looking back, how has your worldview changed over that course of time from when the series began, and how has the series affected how you look at the world?
Ooh, okay. I'll try to sum this up as
you have 30 seconds.
Quickly. I have 30 seconds, no problem. I'll sum up the last 12 years, no problem. So I think the biggest thing for me in how my worldview has changed, I mean, it's difficult to sum up, right? Because for me, it's happened so gradually that it's a little tricky to see. But I do think that I was, with The Long Way, I definitely wanted to push some boundaries, and I wanted to play with the conventions of the genre, you know, right out the gate. Like I looked at the sci-fi I'd grown up with, and, you know, I wanted to put my own spin on it. I wanted to flip the camera around, and I wanted to say, okay, well, what if we do this instead? What if we do this? But I was still very much building off of the existing bedrock there, you know, of having, you know, a very like European Union-esque government system. You know, there's money. There's military, you know, we're in a post-colonial sort of society here, but it still, you know, is based in colonialism and manifest destiny. Like, that's what they're coming from, and those are definitely themes that I poke at a lot during the series. But I think here, you know, with the fourth book, I really do have an interest and a hunger to poke at those things more, and to challenge those things, and to say, do we actually need that in our space opera? Do we need it? Is like, do we need to have colonies or spaceship battles or any of that at all? Can you still write something that feels like it's a part of this tradition, but ditch that stuff? That's the big question that interests me these days. Is I don't want to sort of just poke at the guardrails. I'd like to remove the guardrails entirely, and be a little more radical, I think, with the sorts of societies I build. I think that's that if summed up as quickly as possible. That was not 30 seconds. But,
right.
And how the series has changed me, I mean, extremely briefly, but I've just been tremendously lucky in the wide swath of people that I've been able to interact with because of these books, because I you know, I get letters and I go to conventions and I talk with people, and I've had the tremendous good fortune of being able to go around the world and do that. And so the books have definitely been shaped by the people I've encountered because of the previous books. I don't think The Galaxy and the Ground Within would have happened at all the way, or it turned out at all the way it did, if it hadn't been for countless wonderful encounters I've had with strangers at cons or at bookstore events or what have you. Those sorts of things are something I was really using as creative fuel for this.
Yes. Which airport were you stuck in that inspired this?
Many is the thing. I actually, a few years ago, so my wife is Icelandic, and so we travel to and from Iceland often, and a lot of the early world building for Wayfarers was done in the Keflavik airport, and you know, sitting around waiting for planes. And the last time I was there a couple of years ago, I was in the bookshop at the airport, and my books were there, and I couldn't find a bookstore staff person around to ask if it was okay to sign them. So I just decided that it was And I wrote in them that like they got started at that airport. So that was, I don't know if the bookstore cops will come after me for that, but it was really nice to see it full circle.
I don't think they have I don't think Iceland's book cops have jurisdiction in California, so you might be safe.
I think I'm okay. Good.
All right, so let's switch over to questions. Robin Rose, let's have for the first one is what invention or social aspect have you created for the series that you wish existed in our world? Oh,
what a great question. I want the little, no, that's so frivolous, but okay, we'll go with Immubots, which are they have these little nanobots that patrol your bloodstream and keep you healthy. So when you go to the doctor, you have a little patch on your wrist. It also doubles as like an ID, and you can use it to pay for stuff. And you just swipe it, and all of your bots report back what's going on in here. And I think it's just a much nicer way to go to the doctor. And I think it's very efficient. And you can program them to do stuff. If you need to patch a bone or, do something particular, you can send your bots off to take care of it. I think I personally would love to host millions of little robots.
I hear that's the next iPhone, Apple Watch release.
Oh.
Next up from Anna McDuff is there a chance that you might write a second space opera set on the Wayfarer, or do you prefer to write a new setting each time? And that's if anybody hasn't read this series, it's worth noting that this isn't really a linear series. Each book is its standalone. Some characters carry over. I know in this latest one there's some tiebacks to The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, but I guess why write a new setting each time, and will you be returning to the Wayfarer?
So Galaxy on the Ground Within was intended as the last book in the series. I'm ready to go do other things. So at this time, I do not have any plans to return to the setting or to the Wayfarer. And the reason that I haven't ever returned to the Wayfarer is very simple. I didn't have more of a story there. I told the story I wanted to tell, and I didn't have anything further, and I didn't want to cheapen it or come back with something hollow or scrape the bottom of the barrel just for the sake of continuing that. I always left the door open for them. Like there was always the feeling of, well, if more story for them pops into my head, then I'll run with it. But it never did, so I didn't want to force it.
Mm-hmm. And what was, I guess, something we talked about earlier is that you had this big box of stories. So I guess if you didn't if you didn't have an explicit plan to return to the Wayfarer, how did the other stories come about, given that they're all standalones? Did any of those stories come out of that big box of ideas, or did they just sort of grow organically?
Generally speaking, I wanted to, with each book, I wanted to explore a different part of the galaxy. The intent with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet was really to tell a slice of life story, like here's how this galaxy looks. And then once I had the opportunity to do more, it just made sense to me to not stay on that one ship, because that really limits your view of here's what life in the galaxy looks like. So I didn't have any grand plan for it. I just always knew after I finished a book kind of where I wanted to head next. The one book that I did harvest some of the stuff in the box for was, not aside from lore, because that obviously came into everything else, but A Close and Common Orbit, which is the second book in the series. Half of that book, Pepper's story, which I won't get into for those who haven't read it, but Pepper's story was initially, it was the first short story I ever got, or it was the first piece of fiction I ever got a rejection letter for. It was this little short story that I'd written that was really bad, and absolutely deserved the rejection letter. I hadn't had that much practice yet. I wasn't good enough to tell that story yet. But it was a story that kind of stuck with me, and that I still had a soft spot for, and decided to appropriately, for A Closed and Common Orbit, recycle. And I took what I could from that original idea, and then fleshed it out into half of that book.
Right. Tiffany Dang asks, I love the title of the books in the Wayfarers series. Are they by any chance inspired by Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series?
No, they're not. They're so not consciously anyway. I mean, with titles, I feel like I'm very slapdash with titles in that I just kind of throw words together until I find something that works. I don't title ahead of time, and usually it's somewhere sort of, I don't know, halfway or more through the process where either I decide it's time for a title or my publisher is very patiently knocking on my door being like, we could really use a title soon. With all of them, I try to, especially because they are all about, many different characters and because they're not heavily plot driven, I try to find the idea or the concept or the feeling that sums up everything. Like what's the umbrella that I can put over all of this? And then it really is just a matter of throwing things up on my whiteboard or putting Post-its up on the wall, and shuffling things around until something feels right.
I feel like they're very complex titles. They're very gorgeous titles. It would be a great thing to put together, to train a small AI on and just start spitting out potential Wayfarers ideas.
It would save me a lot of time, that's for sure.
Let's see, going down the list. Is there any scene or section that brought you the most joy to write?
In all of it? Gosh.
Gotta go all the way back.
Goodness. Let's see.
Unpublished counts too. We don't have to have read them.
I don't know. I feel like
go back to fan fiction if you
some margin. Well, if we're going to talk about fan fiction, no, we're not talking about fan fiction. So, because then we'll never get out of here. Let's see. Scenes that I particularly write. I really like the very last. Okay, we'll go for one from each book. I really like the last scene in The Long Way to a Small Ink Planet. Like the very, very last scene. I will not tell you what it is, but if you've read it, you can flip to it and see what it is, but I like that scene a lot. This is going to sound so weird, but there's a scene in A Close and Common Orbit where Jane is talking to Owl. These characters mean nothing to you if you haven't read it, but Jane is talking to Owl while she's field dressing a dog, and it sounds super gross, but there's something about that scene that I just find really tender, and I like that scene a lot. Record of a Spaceborn Few. How can I explain this one without spoilers? I really, and I apologize for this, but I really, really like the scene where Ace and Sawyer have a very important interaction. It's the second one they have. I can't say anything else about it because it's too much. But that was actually the first thing in the book I ever wrote, was that scene where she's doing her job. And then Galaxy and the Ground Within. There's a scene with Speaker at the very end in the epilogue that I think was maybe my favorite part of the book to write. Either that or go ahead.
I was going to guess the cheese, but
I did really enjoy the cheese. But as far as the one I think I took the most pleasure in was Speaker at the very end.
All right. Sorry, some of these are a little bit out of order. What are some of the processes that you've gone through while naming different alien species and coming up with their languages? Are there real world influences there, or is it just pure creative juices flowing?
I think it's purely just making stuff up. I will admit, this is a terrible thing to admit. I hate naming things. I really do. And I hate making up words, and I know that I have to for this. As far as languages go, and especially names within those languages, I just try to keep it sounding consistent. I do have some broad strokes notes on, these are the sorts of sounds that belong in this language versus another, or Harmagian names are very long and very complicated, and they have these very sort of guttural sounds to them. Eluan names are all constructed and designed for the ease of use for by other species because they don't actually speak out loud among themselves, so they're very simple. And very, very sort of copy paste sort of name. So I mean, I have some rules with that. As far as the languages go, I really am just kind of throwing syllables together until it works. And I cheat because my wife is a linguist by training. So I just, whenever I make some stuff up, I'll go to her and be like, does this track with the rest of it? And usually she says no. And then she'll go through and make a few corrections. I don't spend too much time on that stuff though. Like I don't have any full like conlang rules or anything like that. But I do have a few things here and there to make sure that they seem consistent.
I'm a little surprised to hear that actually, because in Galaxy and the Ground Between, there's a lot of discussion about how languages work and how one species might have a word that they just cannot translate into another one. And forgive me, I'm forgetting. I'm terrible with character names, so I'm forgetting who's involved. But there's a moment where one character I think it's Rovig is in a this little micro natural history museum that a kid has put together, and he's explaining this type of poetry to him, and it's really interesting because the way his language works is that there's like a spoken version, and then there's like another version that it's like clicks and you have to explain it a little bit, but like he's trying to explain that like you can say the words on one side of this poem, but on the other it's written in like two different sides. On the other side, it sort of conveys the feeling that you get from it. So you can like talk about chocolate cake all you want, but there's also the feeling of eating it and tasting it that does not come through in the words.
Right.
So
Rovig is a quillen, which is a big lobstery looking species, and they can make two sets of sounds simultaneously. And so there's, sort of speech like we had, but they also have these mouth parts that create all these clicks and like additional sounds, which is really where the inflection and a lot of the delivery comes from with that. So the writing system you described is something I absolutely sat around with my wife at the kitchen table and hashed out over a pot of tea. Mostly it was because I said I need to come up with a system of writing that makes sense for a species that doesn't have hands, and they have little appendages and so we landed on I was thinking about cuneiform, sort of the tapping into clay, and she said, well, you could communicate a lot with that, with different depths, and sort of if you're using a three-dimensional medium to write, like you could do a lot with that. And so I really liked the idea that this is me bringing my theater stuff in, that like all writing comes with stage direction, essentially. Like it's intended to be read out loud, and so that it doesn't just the way you write their language isn't just here's what the words are, but it's also here's how this is conveyed. Here's the here's the delivery you're supposed to give with it. So I'm glad you picked up on that because we had a good time.
I'm imagining a lobster tapping on a keyboard very quickly. You mentioned your wife is a linguist. Like what writing is so often a very solitary thing, but like what influence has your wife had on the series?
Oh, enormous, just immeasurable. I think because language and things like you said, like there are words that can't be translated, and all sorts of miscommunications or gaps that can't be filled because of those sorts of things is definitely an idea I've absorbed from her over the years. And also, just the fact that we are an international family, aside from just having to travel, having to figure out, where it is we're gonna put down our roots, at least for a little bit, we've bounced around quite a bit, but it's also been, we've been together 17 years, and so much of that has been navigating those little moments that I like playing with in the series. So much of things like this food is weird, or your body language doesn't make sense to me, or I don't understand this joke. All of that is just, an unfathomable amount of energy in our relationship has been spent on that. Especially, she's not from here, and she's not a native English speaker. And so that, even to this day, even though we know each other as well as we know ourselves, there's always these little tiny things we have to iron out amongst or between each other. So much of that experience has informed how I write aliens relating to one another and being, you know, family members with each other.
Mm-hmm. Who finds the other's food weirdest?
That depends entirely on what we're talking about. So, as mentioned, she's from Iceland. Their national dish is fermented shark. It smells like ammonia and death, and I don't know why they persist in doing this. But she also doesn't understand peanut butter, like just as a concept. Like she, well, I mean, no, it's so common. It's so common for Europeans to not like peanut butter. Also, my mom's family's all from Germany, and they very, very mixed opinions on peanut butter. It depends a lot. I think my food is less weird, but that's because I'm here on the microphone and I can say that.
Another question here is, if you had a day to visit this world you created, at the caveat that you won't die, what would you do?
What would I do? So are we talking about the Galactic Commons as a whole, or are we talking about the world within Galaxy?
Let's do the whole commons.
The whole thing. I would go to Hashkath, which is the Andrisk homeworld. It's a moon, and I would hang out. It seems like a very a very chill place to be. I would also like to go to Port Coriol. There are some areas in there I might avoid because they're a little bit sketch, but I think some of the like restaurant districts there, I could spend a few really good days just eating my way through.
Presumably, if there's no fermented shark, or
presumably if there's no fermented shark, yeah.
You're the writer. You can write that bit out.
Exactly. There's no fermented shark in my universe. I've done
it. Heather's asking, do you create such interesting and diverse characters in your books? Have any of your characters been based on real people or experiences?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I like to compare writing anything to making dinner out of whatever leftovers you have in the fridge. So many of my characters, it can be anywhere on a spectrum from here's a little snippet of conversation I overheard, or just like this little piece, to here's somebody I just copy pasted wholesale into the book. Kizzy in The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is that. She's based entirely off of a friend I had in college named Christine. There are things that Kizzy says that are just verbatim things that Christine said. And the whole reason behind that was because I didn't want like a Starfleet whiz kid who could fix every problem. When I was developing the crew, I was like, okay, who's the last person you want running the engine room if like everything's going wrong? And instantly I was like, Christine. So like that's that, you know, so sometimes it's like that, but a lot of the others are mixes of things. I'll start with a little kernel of an idea or a little piece of a person, or sometimes a piece of myself. And then, you know, I embellish it and add other things to it and, you know, glue some other stuff on it and go from there.
We've got just a couple more minutes. There's a couple questions about sort of influences and favorite authors. So I guess, who are some of your favorite authors? Not necessarily science fiction. And another one is have you read Sherry Tepper's books? And your work is very different from her. Your work is very different from hers, but she seems to be the closest I can think to removing the guardrails and reimagining science fiction.
I have not read her work, so I will definitely check that out. As far as my favorites go, the big one for me is Ursula K. Le Guin. I wouldn't have this job, I don't think, if I hadn't picked her up when I was in high school. Actually been handed her work when I was in high school and told, I think you'll really like this. She was the one who really opened my eyes to what science fiction was capable of. I was already a big fan of you know, space opera on the small screen at that point, but she really opened my eyes to what else you could do with it. Margaret Atwood is another big one for me. Those were those. I mean, that's sort of, you know, the lions of the genre, but I definitely cut my teeth on them when I was younger. And Carl Sagan, as mentioned, obviously nonfiction, but his work had just an enormous influence on my worldview, and he was just a tremendous writer as well. I hope I would love to be half that eloquent. I think, it's something I'm always striving for. And just the level of poetry he had in his words remains just incredibly inspiring.
Yeah. And Wayfarer, this book is the last one in the Wayfarer series, but you have a new book coming out later this year, A Song for the Wild Built from Tor.com. Can you, I guess, set that up a little bit? Like, how is this different from the Wayfarers, and what were you, I guess, what's different about it, and like, what did you learn from Wayfarers that you're able to apply, that you've been able to bring into it?
So, A Song for the Wild Built is a solar punk science fantasy. It takes place in a secondary world, completely disconnected from our universe, and it is it's set in this very solar punk sort of society. And I'm trying to sum it up quickly because I know we have very little time.
5 minutes.
I think that. Okay. The story focuses on a traveling monk named Sibling Dex, who is the first human to encounter a robot in several centuries. The robots wandered off into the wilderness 200 years ago and have not been heard from since, due to circumstances you can read about. They go on a cool road trip together. It's very different from Wayfarers in that it's, there's no spaceships here. This is a very terrestrial sort of story. It's a very, very earthy sort of story. But I think the thing I learned from Wayfarers with this was to not be afraid of very quiet, simple stories. Psalm is definitely the quietest, simplest thing I've written thus far. And I think when I first started writing Wayfarers, I had this fear when I was writing The Long Way to a Small Hungry Planet that I was like, well, this isn't a real book. Like, there's no planets blowing up. There's no like big MacGuffin-y plot. Like this isn't real science fiction. And then I decided that I didn't agree with my own assessment of that, and have just continued to double down on, no, we can tell really simple stories here. And so in that, I was unafraid with Psalm to really lean into that and not be afraid to take it very slow.
Mm-hmm. With this book, I guess, what are you looking forward to for the future? Are you optimistic about what is ahead of us, and either for your writing or for life in general?
Well, life in general, I think we'll see. I think we have the potential to have a good future and a bright future. The will just has to be there. But I maintain that humanity is a lot more capable than I think we give it credit for. So I maintain hope on that front. As far as my own writing goes, I'm very excited for what's happening next. I can't talk too much about the projects I have ahead yet, but I have quite a lot lined up. And bittersweet as it is to say goodbye to Wayfarers, I'm really looking forward to playing in a new sandbox and to exploring new things and to starting from scratch. So I'm actually really, really looking forward to where it is I'm headed next.
Yay! I love that because I feel like it's so easy, especially in the past year, to think about all of the darkness and all of the literally being locked in apartments and slightly post-apocalyptic worlds. So hope and optimism is a very beautiful thing to hear about. So just so many applauses for that. Unfortunately, it is at the hour. This has been such a joy, though, getting to hear you talk. Becky, absolute joy. And Andrew, thank you so much for all of the amazing questions and being a phenomenal moderator. And also thank you to our audience for all of the love and all of the great questions as well. This was such a fun event. And if you are looking for just a good story about people, check out these books. It doesn't matter that they're in space, even though it's a really cool setting, so definitely check it out for the setting and the cultures. but just a good story about people, which I think will connect with everyone on a certain level. So thank you all so much for joining us. Don't forget there are new books coming out as well, which makes me ask one final question, and that is, where can our readers find you, keep up with what's going on with you, so that all of the secret projects that we cannot hear about today, they can one day figure out about?
You can find me on my website, otherscribbles.com. I'm not on social media, so that is the one place you can find me. But I do have a newsletter there that you can sign up for, and I send out releases whenever I'm having events or book launches or things like that.
Awesome.
And you can find me. I write a newsletter called Transfer Orbit, and I actually have Becky and I spoke about a week ago. I have an interview with her that has some of the same questions, but some new ones as well that will be going up hopefully this week. I've also interviewed Martha Wells recently, and I generally spend an issue a week talking about the state of science fiction. So that's where you can generally find me. I'm also on Twitter and other places that I haven't been able to escape from just yet.
And on Twitter, is the handle just your name, or, because I know from trying to find authors on Twitter, it can be a tricky beast in and of itself just to find the right person?
I'm at Andrew Liptak. I'll type it into the chat, and you can also find links to the newsletter on my profile.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Becky, congratulations on ... As of now, the last book in this world. And we are excited to see other things from you. Everyone, if you would like to purchase any of these books coming out, well, they're already out. If you would like to purchase any of Becky's books that are out, or Andrew's book that is coming out, then there will be the purchase book button down below, and we will see you all next time. Have a lovely rest of your evening. Goodbye, guys.
Bye. Thank you so much.